Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Tardieu, and I'm the Secretary General of the International Network of Basin Organizations. I'm very happy to welcome you this morning on INBO's behalf and on behalf of the European Centre for River Restoration. I have to share with you the apologies of Martin James, the chairman of the ECRR, but he will be represented by our dear colleague Bart Fokens, Associated Expert and Executive Secretary of ECRR, and I'll be happy to share the floor with you, Bart, in a few minutes now. A few words to introduce our webinar of this morning, dedicated to improving national river continuity restoration policies for European ecosystem-based river management. We know that EU water bodies are degraded. And we know that this is a very necessary condition if we want to achieve the good ecological status of our rivers under the Water Framework Directive. It's a very necessary condition to preserve water courses in good ecological and functional conditions and to ensure the restoration of degraded water courses. Europe's rivers, Europe's lakes and alluvial habitats remain under strong pressure, we know that. And among the key pressures, fragmentation and hydromorphological changes remain in the top tier, as it has been again shown by the last European assessments after 2 RBMP cycles. So we have this transversal objective to preserve and to restore water bodies. And the recent EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 calls for greater efforts to conform to the Water Framework Directive with a view to ensure that by 2050, all of the ecosystems are restored, resilient, and adequately protected. And then by 2030, at least 25,000 kilometers of rivers are free-flowing again. And we know that the road is not easy for the European Nature Restoration Law. So rivers are connected to their environment. And beyond the longitudinal continuity and obstacles, rivers are in strong relation with their environment, such as wetlands, meadows, or forests. And they are all in interaction within the watershed. That's the reason behind the recent initiative that has been launched by INBO, the Nature Conservancy, and other partners, explaining that there is no water security without ecological security, and there is no ecological security without water security. This is an open call, and you're very welcome if you want to sign in. Last year, during the 2022 Europe INBO conference, water was, of course, at the heart of our exchanges. And since water is used in very multiple ways, agriculture, industry, domestic uses, and surrounded by multiple crises such as energy, biodiversity, pollution, or climate change, we underlined the necessity also to preserve rivers connected to their environment. And this is, again, the central topic of the next Europe INBO workshop that will be dedicated on river management in a climate change context, challenges and opportunities. And it will take place during our next Europe INBO conference in Valencia, in Spain, from October 16th to 19th. So, of course, we believe in the importance of IWRM and transboundary cooperation, since sustainable management of water resources requires to implement integrated resources management supported by appropriate transboundary cooperation too. And this is the clear link with INBO objectives supporting these principles, but also the exchanges of knowledge and expertise between water stakeholders and basin organizations. That's the reason why we've been very happy to be partner in the organization of this webinar. Thank you for your attention. And now I think I leave the floor to you, Bart.
Your mic.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric, for your appropriate introduction. It is indeed quite a challenge for the future, and that's also the reason why we did this study. I would like to give a short introduction first before we ask Clara to present her study results in this webinar. My introduction will explain a little bit how we and why we came to this study. Part of the presentation is also a video presentation, and it will be followed by a Mentimeter poll. But I like to start with the presentation now first by sharing the screen and showing the PowerPoint. You can all see it now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Then very brief about the European Centre for River Restoration. It's a network of best practices of river restoration in Greater Europe, and we have an extended network of about 2,500 people who call themselves river restoration practitioners. On itself, we are structured as an association with 15 member organizations all over Europe, and they are from river restoration practitioners to NGOs to governmental organizations. We present today a study on European National River Continuity Restoration Policies Review. This is supported by STOWA. STOWA is a foundation for applied research in the Netherlands for the regional water authorities, and they also support the ECRR because they are a member of the ECRR. And the study was performed by Clara Smit. She is a student at the University of Duisburg-Essen and the Radboud University in the Netherlands. So a combination of a German and a Dutch university on transnational ecosystem-based water management. And related to that study, she is at the moment in Spain to complete her study.
Could you just put it full screen, please? I've tried to inform you. Yeah, perfect, thanks.
Now it's full screen?
But in presenter mode, you know, you need to, yeah, thanks.
Now it's okay. Yeah, thank you. I show the logos at the left side to get an impression of our members, and on the right side is the cover of the report that has been made from the study results, and that will be sent afterwards to all who registered to this webinar, of course, but will also send out to our extended network. I got already quite a lot of people who could not attend this webinar but wanted to see the results. But in the course of this afternoon, it will be either available on the website or it will be directly sent to you through the addresses we have of our connected participants. Why river continuity restoration? The Water Framework Directive, just a moment. The Water Framework Directive is looking for a good ecological status or a good ecological potential of all our waters, and pays quite a lot of attention to water quality, and it has, I would say, almost dominated the discussion through the last 20 years. or the first 20 years of the Water Framework Directive. But there are also included hydromorphological elements that should be improved and river continuity. This is the field of river restoration, the hydromorphological elements and the river continuity. It's called the river continuity in the Water Framework Directive, but on the other hand, it's mainly longitudinal and sometimes lateral connectivity, because real continuity is longitudinal, lateral, temporal, and vertical connectivity. So the river restoration and Water Framework Directive implementation in principle has already weaker starting points for restoring rivers than they actually should have. It was in 2017 that we had a first workshop at the IS Rivers Conference in France to see if we could start to pay a little bit more attention to this issue of river continuity. And from that time on, we worked first of all on making it a guiding team for the ECRR. And here came out that in 2021, we did a study, a survey on policies and strategic planning all over Greater Europe. There were 28 countries participating in this, and it was a real success to get people connected, first of all, to themselves, to others, and our organization, of course, concerning this subject. This figure shows in a certain scheme the 28 countries in red and in black, how they are spread over certain characteristics of their policy they have. The red ones, they show up later on in Clara's presentation. I'm not going to explain much about it because that's her story to be told. But already by then we came to the conclusion that there could be done something about more harmonization of river restoration policies over all the European countries, especially those who are a member of the EU. And we recommended by then to have a kind of framework, if possible, that is shown in this sheet, the survey policy outline. It has been mentioned over here. It starts with a barrier database and it ends with awareness raising. But the question is, and was then and is today again, is there a general policy framework for river restoration, continuity restoration in Europe possible? And of course, that document had also quite a lot of general recommendations. This is 2 years ago. The report is available. It has been discussed in several fora. And one of the conclusions was that that they said it is very interesting. First of all, it gives attention to a very important subject. But secondly, it's even more important because the countries who are working on this, they do this all by their own. They translate the European Water Framework Directive in their own national policies. And it would be very helpful if there could be some guidance and at least some information exchange so that we can learn from each other. Out of these conclusions, we started the study on national river continuity restoration policy for Europe. There were 8 countries. They sent us our policies. From the others, we don't know if they have a written policy or at least a clearly written policy or not. So I warn you already, today we present the results from 8 countries, and we should not generalize the conclusions from these 8 for the whole of Europe. On the other hand, the information that is from these 8 countries brought forward can be of interest, of course, for all the 27 European countries within the EU. Why do we call this a webinar, or give the title Improving National River Continuity Restoration Policies for European Ecosystem-Based Restoration? Improving because we discovered, and I like to stress this, and Clara will do this again, I think, that those countries who contributed to the study showed that they were very active in the field of the policy development. And it was already clear that from the beginning to us, because all policies were up to date from 2022, and we did the study in 22. So this is really a nice result from the countries where we received the policy from. We learned also that the Water Framework Directive implementation is a huge driver for the policy making. The Water Framework Directive itself is, of course, not a prescribing directive in such a sense that it puts targets, etc., but it gives directions for river restoration and for good ecological station and all what is connected. And those countries we discussed the results with, they showed that they made a good progress with the policy making in relation to the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. Looking forward, we talk again about improving. Erik mentioned it already about the free-flowing rivers and all what's related. And actually, we try with the free-flowing rivers to restore ecosystem restoration, ecosystem based. That's the new development, and this means that the policies of the countries, the national policies, should be improved again, because this is what Clara will tell us in her study. They reached a certain stage of development that's rather suitable for the present situation, but if we do want more on river restoration in relation to river continuity, then more achievements need to be made. The study results, therefore, form not the end of a discussion, but to us they form a start of the discussion. But before we start the discussion, we first should look at the video, the Mentimeter, and then I will introduce very briefly Clara, and she will give the presentation on the results. I thank you very much, and looking forward to the presentations. The video first, that will be shown by Julie.
Yes, I'm actually doing. It is.
Thank you, Bart, for this introduction and video. I think that's already a good introduction that allows us to dive into an approach that reconciliates both the policy approach and the practical approach, as we've seen here with works in the field and on the video. You've seen the study introduced already, and now let's work collectively for an online poll. In the chat, you have the link to the WOOC lab that is now displayed on your screen. So I invite you to click on it, and then you will be able to reply to the online poll that we have prepared for you. 4 questions in 5 minutes, so quite challenging, but we will add on now. You have 30 seconds to reply to the first question that will soon be displayed on your screen. So let's crack on with the first one. First question. Make sure to connect to the link in the chat. What is your professional relation with river continuity restoration? We want to know what are the types of profiles of the participants here to make sure we know who is connected with us. We have now more than 100 people connected. We're glad to have that much of interest for a topic we know is a technical one, which will be also addressed during Europe INBO 2023 conference in Valencia in October. Please make sure to reply, and we will display in just a second the replies we've received so far. Let's now close the poll. We are heading to more than half of the participants already replying. Good. And we see, yeah, a majority of researchers, but also decision makers that are developing policies for river continuity restoration. And we're glad not only to limit to the research field and science policy interface, but also to have some practitioners on board. Thanks a lot for that. It gives us a clear picture of who we have with us. We can add to the second question. Now on what is the most used measure for river continuity restoration in your views, and you have three choices here on dam removal, making a bypass, or installing a fish pass. Different methods, different measures to re-establish river continuity restoration. I know that I created some frustration by stopping the first question early, but I know that time is limited, so please click on your preferred option quickly. And I will also try to at least get half of the connected participants replying before we close this question. Thank you. I see the figures coming up quite quickly. We can now close the poll to see the results. And yeah, mainly installing fish bass. We understand that this was indeed historically the main measure to restore the continuity of our rivers. And it seems to be a trend, and now more and more, to have dam removal as well supported and implemented on the ground. So it's a new, a relatively new trend of maybe bolder measures implemented. Thank you for that. And we add to the third question of our poll. And yeah, you can have the link, I see on the chat, the question. The three links that are right above your question are the links you need to click on to get access to the WooClap. And this question, what are the priorities for river continuity restoration, river flow, fish migration, nutrient transport, sediment transport, or geomorphological processes? Of course, all of these are important, but you need to pick and choose maximum 3 answers so that we have a clearer idea of what the priority should be in your views. Of course, here we have researchers, we have policymakers, we have practitioners. So we are the right people, the people who have expertise on this field. We have 55 respondents, over 100 participants, so we can close and show the results. Thank you. And yeah, a majority are considering river flows dynamics to be the most important aspect of river continuity restoration, and that should be a priority. Fish migration comes second, and third, sediment transport. I will just mention these ones, which does not mean we need to focus only on this one, but of course they should be priorities according to the participants. Thanks a lot for your replies, and we head to the last, but of course not least, questions on what is required in your views to increase the implementation of river continuity restoration measures. Is it policy development, stakeholder involvement, technical support, financing, or improving the governance and administrative structure more broadly? Here as well, we need to prioritize, so please limit yourself to 2 answers max. And we'll do the same logic. When we reach around 50, 55 people, we will close the poll to get the results, to make sure we respect the time constraints that we have. So please do click quickly, and then we can see what the majority thinks about these measures. So we can close the poll. What is required in your views? And we see that it is mainly financing, financing is, of course, one of the most pressing issues, and we know we have to find the economic model as well to finance river continuity restoration. And then comes policy development and improving the governance and administrative structures. In other words, we have the expertise, we know what the techniques are. Thank you, and I think that's all for this little icebreaker. And Bart, you have the floor now to introduce the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, thank you very much to the participants to this webinar for their response. In some way, we will share this also back to you, maybe not only through the recorded version of the webinar, but also in some other way. It's, of course, just a small group within the whole of Europe, but you are an important group because you show interest in the subject. So it's good to have your results. I indeed want to go now to Clara's presentation. It was about 1 year ago that Clara and myself met at the IAS Rivers conference in France, and there it all started. Since then, quite a lot happened. First of all, to make a contract to get the funds, and then to formulate the study. And there were also some problems with finding a space in the Netherlands to live. So at the end, you made it mainly from home, but we had frequently contact. I enjoyed that very much, and it led to a very nice result, Clara. And I'm really happy that even you are in Spain today, you are able to present live your results of your study you implemented. Of course, it was our study altogether, ECR and many others, but this is what I'm going to tell later on when we start the discussion. Please go ahead.
Okay, hello. I will start sharing my screen. Can you see it all in presentation mode? Yes.
Yeah.
It's not yet full screen though.
It's not, okay. No, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Then yes, also a welcome from my side. So I'm Clara Schmidt, and I conducted the European National River Continuity Restoration Policies Review. And yeah, river continuity restoration will help to prevent the extinction of diatremous fish species, as we all know, but it will also help to achieve the relevant water legislation targets, such as the Water Framework Directive or the EU Biodiversity Strategy 2030. However, to reach these goals of the respective legislations, it is of importance how they are translated into actions in practice. And therefore, the current situation in different countries must be understood. And when talking about river continuity, it must be clarified that this study concentrated on the longitudinal river continuity, meaning the connectivity between up and downstream, and especially in the light of fish migration, sediment transport, and habitat connectivity within rivers. So I will start with some general information on how I proceeded with the study. The first step of the study was to read all policies and additional documents that were sent to me by the country contact persons to filter out relevant information. And this was already the first hurdle I had to clear, since I had to use translator tools to be able to read all documents in English. But since I could not be 100% sure that the translation were completely correct, we held a country contact person online meeting where I presented my first findings and gave everyone the opportunity to check and complete the information for each country. So on the left side of this slide, you can see the graph that you've already seen during Bart's presentation. And yes, the countries marked in red are the ones that sent me their policies and additional documents. And yeah, so I read them all, which was already a lot of information, but we wanted to go even further into detail, into depth, and therefore decided to conduct interviews. However, due to resource and time limitations, it was not possible to interview all of the countries. And yes, to obtain a broad overview of the policy situation in countries with different circumstances, the aim was to interview countries from all 4 quadrants of the matrix. Yes, therefore, the selection of countries which were chosen for interviews is based on the list of countries that provided their policy and on the distribution of the countries in the 4-quadrant matrix. And the countries that were interviewed are Austria, Finland, France, Norway, and Slovakia. After the interviews were conducted, I wrote summaries based on the text documents and the interviews for each country and discuss the resulting conclusions and recommendations with an advisory group of water professionals from different organizations. First of all, which has to be said, river continuity restoration is not the topic of a single policy, but rather of the national water policies of all countries. So yeah, during the study, it has become clear that each country possesses a legally binding document entailing river continuity aspects, but yeah, not all countries use the same clearly defined terms of policy, strategy, and action plan for additional guiding documents. However, in the study, all kind of documents were considered if they entailed any content on longitudinal river continuity restoration to gain an overview of the situation in each country with the aim not to disregard any valuable information. And then the term policy was used throughout the study to facilitate the understanding of the report and to focus on the content rather on the terminology. Based on the results of a literature research on what makes a good policy in general, as well as on the results from the 2021 survey by the ECRR and STOWA, a list of categories and subcategories that a complete policy should contain was created and used to perform a detailed investigation of the received national policies and as well as of the following interviews. And yeah, the categories are the following. So first of all, we were interested to see if the policy identified the issue of river continuity restoration or fragmentation. Also, if it defined a goal towards river continuity restoration, and also if it said what is river continuity restoration. Then we were interested in the policy prerequisites. So what is the historic background or the legal background, what drivers were responsible for the policy to become into existence. Then more in detail for the policy itself, what kind of restoration tools did it contain? So what does the planning process look like? Do countries use a barrier database? What prioritization methods for water bodies, but also for single barriers are in place? What are the specific available plans and measures? And also how is technical knowledge gained and improved? Then also we thought the consultation to be quite important. So what is the stakeholder involvement? How is it done? What is the public participation in general? And also does the policy include tools for awareness raising for the topic? Then, yeah, of course, the financing, and as I've seen during the poll, that's also something you all think is very important. Then we also were interested in the decision making. So which authority on which level is responsible for making decisions about river continuity restoration. Then about the implementation process itself. So are there technical guidance and support available? Is the whole implementation process top down or bottom up, or maybe a synthesis of the two? Then we also thought the monitoring and evaluation to be quite important. So do they exist? If yes, to what extent, on what levels? What is monitored and evaluated? And also quite important, is there an adjustment existent according to the results of the monitoring and evaluation processes? Then also we investigated if there existed a linkage between the policy and the European Water Framework Directive, or how much are they linked? And then of course we wanted to know what makes a policy effective. So what part of the design of a policy really enhances its effectiveness, or do policy mixes exist that are being quite effective? Yes, and then for the interviews, at least one representative from the stakeholder group of policymakers and planners and one representative from the policy implementers group for each country was interviewed. And the interviews had the purpose to investigate the process of designing a complete and effective policy. Each interview followed the same schema and contained the same main topics, but the specific questions for each topic were tailored to the respective countries and based on my first findings from reading the policies. So now I will come to the main part of my presentation. I will tell you some of the results the study has. Due to time limitations, I'm not able to give you all results in detail, but also this is not really necessary since the report will be published today and you will be all able to read up on it. So we choose to summarize some of those results for the following categories: policy design and administrative structure, the restoration tools, stakeholder involvement, financing, and monitoring and evaluation. And we choose these categories because we feel like they are especially important for the effectiveness of the policy, and also that there exists a certain range of approaches from countries towards these categories. Okay, so we will start with the policy design and the administrative structure. So yeah, fish migration is an established motivator, a main driver for longitudinal river continuity restoration in all investigated countries. Other aspects such as sediment transport, habitat connectivity, and environmental flow, they are also mentioned in some, but not in all policies. However, the fact remains that fish migration receives a special attention, sometimes even in the form of a separate fish migration strategy. Nevertheless, other drivers such as sediment transport seem to gain more and more importance according to the interviewees. Yes, all policies identify issues regarding river fragmentation and define goals for river restoration, but these goals differ in specification. So, for example, Austria, France, Germany, and Spain specifically mention river continuity restoration in their goals. Also all policies evolved through the years or were newly introduced by the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. The fact that in several countries, more than one governmental authority is responsible for the water management leads to the situation that different interests can be prevalent. So a common situation is that the Ministry of Environment is in charge of the maintenance and restoration of water courses, while the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry has a special interest in the fishery sector, which can either cause a very fruitful cooperation, but also provide situations of conflict when it comes to the decision which restoration measures are suitable and which locations should receive priority. The same also applies for the relationship between the Ministry of Environment and the energy sector regarding hydropower dams and their function as river continuity barrier, as well as a source of energy. The administrative structure of the water management sector is quite important for the implementation of river restoration, since it determines on which level decisions are made, which stakeholders are involved, and what financial tools are available. The different historically groundwater management structures in each country led to the conclusion that the development of a general policy framework might be less useful than recommendations for effective tools and approaches under certain circumstances. This conclusion is also underpinned by the fact that various social, political, topographical, as well as climatical circumstances in the single countries all influence the approach of water management. Okay, and now we come to the restoration tools. Concerning the plans and measures to be used, they are included in some policies, and however, if they are mentioned, they differ very much in detail. Also, how to gain and share technical knowledge is only described in a few policies, which does not mean that it's not existing or not happening. It's just it's not written down, let's say. Most countries focus on the river continuity restoration of obsolete barriers, and the prerequisite for this approach is an existing and maintained barrier database. So all countries maintain a barrier database to a certain extent, and while some possess a quite comprehensive and detailed barrier database, others are still in the process of completing their partial database by integrating already existing data or collecting additional information. So Austria, France, Germany, Lithuania, and Spain, they maintain a specific database for their barriers. And France and Spain use a quite comprehensive database, which also include, for example, removed barriers, the equipment of barriers, and in general, progress tracking. Now towards the prioritization methods. So half of the countries prioritize water bodies for restoration projects. Common prioritization criteria are fish migration, in general, the fish biostenosis, but also protected areas such as Natura 2000, Ramsar sites, and red-listed species. While hydromorphological aspects, water flows, and sediment transport are only sometimes mentioned. More than half of the countries prioritize single barriers. And here, again, the main criteria is which restoration will have the highest ecological impact. Other criteria are the kilometer of river length that will be opened, spawning habitats, obsolete dams, and hydromorphological aspects in general. It also became clear that a combination with other measures such as flood protection and floodplain restoration are often sought for. And again, the sediment transport, the ecological flow regimes, nutrient transport, etc., are hardly mentioned. Yeah, considering the prioritization of continuity restoration projects, the single approaches differ a little, but not too much. So, for example, often the priority areas from the eel management plan are considered. Furthermore, some countries, for example, Austria prioritize from big to small in terms of catchment size, and from down to upstream in terms of river stretches. The stakeholder involvement is widely recognized as important, but implemented in different ways. So next to the stakeholder consultation rounds, during the development process of a national policy, the stakeholders are usually also consulted and involved in the individual river continuity restoration projects. The participatory approach with the advisory boards of local public services, as well as the authorized board associations of private structures and landowners, is prevailing. Other tools for stakeholder involvement are so-called river dialogues and similar activities on social media. Then we also have the water roundtable for face-to-face interaction, annual national conferences and workshops organized for water professionals, or an existing countrywide water restoration network. The implementation of the stakeholder involvement is in most countries organized by the responsible ministry, but in a few countries also in cooperation with local NGOs. Now we come to the financing. So the source of finance are included in all policies, but to a different extent. And it became clear that the funding amounts are highly dependent on the political constellations, which could not be further investigated during the study, again, due to mostly time limitations. The policies distinguish the source of finance between regional, national, and European funds. So private funds were not mentioned at all. And regarding the financing, they aimed at the result of the project fundings seems to determine the funding strategy to a certain extent. So a fast and high number of restoration of waterways will be reached through a general funding of all restoration projects. independent of them being legally enforced or conducted on a voluntary basis. And furthermore, any voluntarily based approach means that not necessarily the most needed barrier restorations are targeted, since the prioritization follows not strictly criteria such as ecological impact. The separation between different barrier types in respect of their use and ownership is possible regarding the funding rates. However, different subsidy rates may lead to disagreement and resentment by the affected stakeholders. Then the time horizon of funding budgets is also an important factor for the policy effectiveness. Some interviewees describe difficulties realizing projects within the 6-year cycles of the river basin management plans, since budget allocations are usually planned for the same period of time.
Clara, you have just a few minutes left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I will hurry then. Yeah, so the monitoring and evaluation is does exist to a certain extent, but in general, there's a standardized method missing, and also human resources can constitute a problem. Okay, so now we have all this information and we ask ourselves, what does it all mean? What are the most important points or the core conclusions that can be helpful for water professionals? And I will now try to tell you all of them in the time that I have left. So the completeness of a policy, although important, should not be overrated, since circumstances that are more determining for the policy effectiveness. So obstacles and drivers of river continuity need to be identified, and suitable and effective solution be found. So, for example, unceasing permits need to be abolished, because water use permits should act as a restoration tool and not act as an obstacle to it. Then also the administrative structure is important. So compromises of different interests should be found on the highest levels, meaning between the different ministries responsible, if there's more than one. The prioritization method for river reaches should be standardized and include all important aspects which are of ecological, social, and economic nature. To be able to make informed decisions, a barrier database is a prerequisite. The AMBER project can be a good starting point for building up a database, but then additional information such as ownership, presence of endangered species, and so on, can be a part of that database. Stakeholder involvement is innovative and has been widely recognized, but I think it's also quite important that the project experiences, restoration data, and information of planned projects between the water professionals of one country, but also in between countries, should be shared. Yeah. Financing mechanism must act as an incentive for river continuity restoration, and the whole process must be transparent. A monitoring and evaluation system is necessary to be able to improve the whole process. And here again, it is important not just the monitoring and evaluation of the restoration measures, but also of the policy implementation itself. Both aspects are quite important. And I hope I still have sufficient time for the recommendations. So they're more looking into the future. And starting on a very generic level, the national river continuity restoration policy of a country needs to be horizontally, so synergy with other national policies and laws, and vertically, so effective on all administrative levels, integrated. In general, it is necessary to combine river continuity restoration with other aspects of water management. Other functions that provide ecosystem services should be included in the financing strategies, prioritization of methods, and monitoring activities. because to include all aspects of longitudinal river continuity will help to get a holistic view and to find synergies more easily. Also, to agree on linguistic terms and their definitions will help to set clear targets shared by all stakeholders and facilitate the communication process. Obstacles and drivers, like I said, need to be identified and recognized to recognize windows of opportunities, either for implementing river continuity restoration measures or to initiate beneficial changes of prevalent circumstances, meaning, for example, to install enabling legislation. Yes, and during the study, it became clear that an evolving river continuity policy process exists and that water professionals are already striving for improvement of river continuity restoration within their means. But yeah, still there are many problems that need to be addressed and conditions that need to be advanced. And hopefully the study will contribute and support this process. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Clara. It was well done. A very good overview and some details, but not too many. That's where the report is for. We have limited time for maybe one or two questions when it's really urgent related to a better understanding what has been presented. And we save our time otherwise for the discussion later on. So is there one urgent question coming up by either the chat box or in some other way, then we could ask to raise it.
We do have a question in the chat from Baton Bengali. Can such a study be replicated for the Western Balkans? And I think that's a common question that we had also during the production of the study. Could this be replicated in the EU in general and in other countries?
Clara, do you want to answer?
Yes, I can give my opinion, of course. I think the study can be repeated, of course, especially since in the written report, there's a more detailed description of the method or the process we went through. So I think that can be repeated. And also I think it's quite important that it will be repeated because we did not receive too many policies from this area, which, I mean, of course we don't know, but maybe that means there are non-existent at the moment. And yeah, such a study might be very helpful to create for the process of creating such a policy. Yeah, it's my thought.
I would like to add that it depends also very much on, of course, the cooperation and the material available out of the ministry and related authorities. We were very lucky with the spontaneous cooperation through the survey we made already in an earlier stage. So this was very helpful to make a quick start. But yeah, having the basic information in some way, orally or on paper available, is essential for being able to make the study, of course. Although interviews were part of the study and can also be very helpful to complete it when it's not complete. Well, one question more: sediment removal, in my opinion, is more important these days. Consider the risk of flash floods. What are your views? Yes, it's becoming more and more important. It's part of the Water Framework Directive. I answered this question more in general because it went through our discussions many times and also later on. And this is what I mentioned in my introduction with the free-flowing rivers. This is mainly done to add other functions to the river than just fish passages for fish migration. It's nice that fish can migrate, then still it's not sure that they can spawn and multiply, I would say. But when you want to restore the river, you need to restore the sediment transport of nutrients, dynamics in water flows, at least in the minimum water flow, etc. So this study made clear, to my opinion, that the policies in these 8 countries are in place, but they still need improvement looking to the future. Well, these were 1.5 questions I would say we answered. I'd like to continue now to introduce the discussion. And we started discussion with 4 very short presentations, each a couple of minutes, because this gives already some directions to the discussions. We invited 4 persons to give a short reflection on the study. They were involved in the study. 2 of them, the first 2 speakers from Finland and France, were involved in the study, and they have all read the final report. And the 2 others were in the advisory group, and they represent 2 European projects I will announce later on. So it's not just that we ask them to read the report and to have a look at it and give their opinion. They were to a high extent involved, at least in giving the information, but also in the discussions. I'd like to start with Aurora from Finland. You are from a regional center in Finland, from the Ministry and Implementation of Water Management Practices. And I'd like to invite you to give your first brief reflection.
Hello, thank you, Bart. It's very nice to be here. And I want to thank Clara for making such an excellent report. It was very interesting to be reading it and be participating in the process. I try to be quite quick because but as I have so many words coming out of my mouth most of the time, so I will try to be clear as well. Some few reflections I collected in these PowerPoint slides. It was a very enjoyable piece to read, and I noticed how much our situation varies between our different nations, and I can't imagine it was an easy task. As someone mentioned earlier about this, how it can be done in other countries as well. We all would like to see it EU-wide, but I can't imagine the task ahead there, although I see the importance there. It's not easy task to do. I congratulate you from the report. We agree on most of the observations about what should be done and how to achieve better ecological status and improve the river continuum. As we here in Finland ride most with the fish, we are making fish passages. We are making migration routes to fish. We are talking about small streams and creeks with sediments and natural flow, but bigger streams, rivers, we talk just about fish. And that should change, and that would need more cooperation just within our nation. Something also that stood up in the report, that some countries use quite strict numerical targets, like for example, France, was it 11% or 15%? Norway has also numerical targets, Slovakia and Spain as well. I don't know if Germany counts, because Germany used like all, that the target is to done these passages or like river continuum to all rivers they have. We have much vaguer targets, like let's do as much as possible. And I don't know, I think we could learn from this, that these set goals could help us to get that. Can I get the next slide? I'll try to hurry up as well. To sum up Finland, we have started river restorations in 1980s, and it accelerated quite a bit in 2010. And our newest program, where I'm working in, started 2020, and we got lots of funding. And this is something that we need to keep in mind. Like we may do as many policies as we can, but we need the funding to succeed in the actual work. We have still a lot more to be done, but our national roadmap how to proceed is pretty clear. Now, next slide, please. And for the next few years, I believe this funding, making funding, as I said previously, to make it more permanent. Of course, this is like egg or chicken or the egg situation. If we have policy, we can get more easily funding, and funding is just required to make everything. EU legislation is going to change quite a bit in the next few years. We have Biodiversity Act coming up, we have Restoration Act. Let's see how it's going to, and we believe that it's going to be a strong influence in the future. And we have quite a different situation here in Finland. We share one river with one EU country. Otherwise, we don't have border rivers like Central Europe could benefit from common policies quite a bit, because the watersheds are shared with so many different countries. We do not have this here in Finland. We have a couple of rivers between Finland and Russia, couple with Norway, and one with Sweden. So it's completely different situation than in Central Europe. And our waters are in bad condition because of heavy forestry. We have done logging, we have acidification in waters, and river continuum is not it's part of the problem, but it's not as big problem as the water qualities. And we are facing but I think this is different. This is very similar in all countries. But here's a few thoughts. I will try to stop talking now so others can take the stage.
Thank you very much, Aurora, for your overview and reflection. And thank you for, of course, the compliments for the study, but your compliments for your cooperation. Then we continue with the next. It's Sophia Fauclet from the Ministry of Ecology, Cohesion of Territories and Energy Transition in France. It was also to a certain extent involved in the study and updated by people also from the Office for Biodiversity in France. May I invite you to give your reflection, Sophia?
Yes, good morning, everyone. And I'm grateful to be here and to have this opportunity to share our thoughts on Clara's study. So first of all, I'd like to thank Clara for her work. We found the study to be very interesting and very comprehensive. And we actually think it would be of interest to extend it to the rest of the member states in order to get an even more comprehensive overview of the existing river restoration policies in Europe. And in our opinion, this study addresses a real need, which is to get to know other ways of implementing river continuity restoration policies, which then makes it possible to get new ideas and new inspiration and share good practice in order to improve our current policies. So that's why it's so important in our opinion, this study. I'd like to give just some very quick element of context about river restoration continuity in France, in order for you to understand our thoughts on this study. So in France, our current river continuity restoration policy is mainly based on a legal obligation to restore longitudinal continuity on some rivers where high environmental stakes have been identified. So this concerns about 11% of French rivers. Those are the rivers in orange on the map. And we also have an obligation to preserve continuity on about 30% of our rivers, which are in blue on the map. So this legal obligation was first implemented in 2012, and now 10 years later, we can say that it yielded many positive results. So we have a comprehensive inventory of barriers. More than 5,500 barriers have been either managed or equipped or removed in order to restore continuity. And also we observed that many restoration projects are now taking place on rivers where there is no legal obligation to do so. So there was a positive ripple effect. Local authorities became aware of the importance of restoring river continuity, and now they are conducting such projects on their own initiative. But then we also have a few downsides. This policy is somewhat controversial. We have some very vocal opponents. They're especially opposed to barrier removal, and they're waging a disinformation campaign about supposed adverse impacts of removing barriers. Also, in 2021, those opponents managed to sway lawmakers into changing the law on the river continuity, and now it's become quite difficult to restore, to remove barriers in order to restore longitudinal connectivity. So, in the light of our results in France, we were very curious about other continuity restoration policies, and that's also why we were so interested in this study. We were wondering, for example, how other member states implemented their river continuity policy, whether their results are very different in terms of effectiveness, in terms of solutions that are chosen to restore continuity. And of course, we also wondered if other member states have similar issues with acceptability of the policy, and if so, what they do about it to improve acceptability. So many of these questions were answered by the study for the member states that were part of it. And here are some of the facts that we learned and found especially interesting. We noticed that most member states implement their river continuity policy through their river basin management plan and programs of measures, which we also do, of course. But yeah, from what we understood, no other country, at least in the study, has directly integrated in their law an obligation to restore continuity, so, like as we did. It seemed to us that many river continuity policies were initially designed to protect migratory fishes. Actually, that's also what Clara said in her presentation. And that's maybe the reason why among continuity restoration measures, fish passes seems to be implemented more often than removal or other solutions. But we also noted that there are maybe been a shift in the last few years and that barrier removal is becoming more commonly implemented, preferred as a restoration measure, which is very interesting. We discovered that some other member states have this issue of long-term or even permanent water permits that can complicate the implementation of mitigation measures or even restoration. Finally, we noted that other member states sometimes suffer from a lack of public support for river restoration projects. And for us, this is still one of the biggest challenge about these river restoration policies. Yeah, knowing that other countries struggle with this issue, it made us wonder whether there was a need for more communication at the European scale about the importance and the benefits of restoring river continuity and more generally the natural functions of rivers. So yeah, that's where our thoughts. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for your reflections. They are very helpful, I think, also for the discussions, not only today, but also afterwards, and to see how we can commonly in some way proceed. When we left the question open, then we can come back to that in the discussion part. I'd like to continue now with the third speaker in this round, and this is Kirsty Blackstock from the James Hutton Institute in Scotland. And why was she invited? Because we were approached at a certain moment by the Merlin project. It's an EU project, she will tell more about it, and we're interested in policies European-wide as well, and heard that we did this study. That make us in contact, and we invited Kirsty on behalf of either the Institute or Merlin, doesn't matter, or both, to participate in an advisory group to guide Clara in her study. This was very helpful for us, and I think it was very useful for Kirsty and the Merlin project, but it's up to her to present her own opinion on this. So Kirsty, may I invite you to give you a short presentation?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So I'm presenting today. I co-lead a piece of work on transformation for river freshwater restoration as part of the Merlin project. I co-lead it with colleagues from WWF, some of here who today. And I just want to say that, first of all, thank you today, Clara and Bart. We found your study very, very helpful for our broader study, which I'll introduce in a minute, because there's a lot of information out there that you already brought together. And that was really important sort of information for us about potential policy levers and how they work. And as you've already said, many of you really need to understand how different member states' policies work in practice. And some of our member states where we're working in Merlin are common with your cases. So again, we could lean on your work. I really like the way you've illustrated the variability between the member states, and you've brought out the economic sectors that use the rivers and can either enable the free-flowing rivers connectivity, or perhaps you have to work with to persuade to do it. So the last point I want to make is that you're really helping bring together a community of practice of people doing different kinds of policy analysis, supporting EU and member state policy development. I think that's really positive. So thank you very much for all your help. So very briefly, the Merlin project is working with water professionals, as you say, striving to do what they can for freshwater restoration and connectivity. We're working in 18 case studies across Europe. You can see the numbers on your screen, and they are clustered as peatland and wetland studies, small stream and basins, and large rivers. And most of the issues to do with the connectivity related to your study will be with our small streams and large rivers clusters. But also, and very importantly to us, is we are working with businesses and economic sectors, 6 of them in Merlin. You can see hydropower, very, very important connection to your study, but also navigation, water supply, and sometimes agriculture also have either currently or historically reasons to put barriers into rivers and perhaps affect connectivity. So we really think we need to understand why they do this and work with them to persuade them under what circumstances they might be willing to remove them. So it's working together, water professionals and the businesses. Just very quickly, we do a very different take on policy analysis, but very complementary. It's broad. So we're thinking about how we can mainstream restoration, what we want to maintain, create, or disrupt. And we look at an idea called policy coherence. So we heard about the synergies in your conclusions, Clara, but the idea is, yes, vertically, do the policies have objectives linked to instruments? Are they well implemented? But also, importantly, do they have the feedback loop? You mentioned monitoring and evaluation, really important. Are the outcomes that we're finding linked back to changing policies? But also this idea of diagonal coherence. Sometimes the objectives of one policy, Water Framework Directive, are actually delivered through the instruments of another policy, such as payments through common agricultural policy that perhaps can help with some restoration measures. And horizontal. So you mentioned, Clara, that river restoration and connectivity may be positively or negatively affected when it can synergize with other policies, but there are some difficult conflicts about the push in the EU energy policies to actually increase hydropower, whereas wanting to remove barriers. So that's what we're looking at in Merlin, and we're looking very broadly, Water Framework Directive, climate laws, and agricultural policy. So just to finish on some points of commonality between our projects and some suggested ways forward for all of us, we also pick up that permitting can be a positive trigger for change in actually asking people to think more broadly about ways they could actually improve connectivity when permits for either hydropower or other barriers come up for approval. We also picked up there are conflicting priorities between ministries, stakeholders, and different types of the public that we need to take seriously if we want to progress this debate. We need to pay attention to multifunctional or multi-objective barriers. And also we've heard from our roundtables organized by colleagues with members of the hydropower sector that people don't always agree with what can be defined as obsolete. We maybe need to talk more about that. There is increasing attention to sediment balance and wider catchment dynamics that seem really important for this debate. And we also really agree more attention to what you evaluate and how the feedback loop goes into changing policy, and sufficient monitoring budget to continue to show whether you're having the effects you want to have once the barrier has been removed. Some suggestions: we really see the nature restoration law as an opportunity, but we need to get around the implementation deficit that we see affecting Water Framework Directive. So we need to find a way of making it stick if it does get through Parliament. So we need to work in sub-catchment and cross-sectoral debates to find some common ground, including really having clear good practice guidance. If we want to involve people beyond the restoration community, we really need to be clear about what we need these business sectors to do. And that includes they want more data on the costs, the benefits, and the effectiveness. Also, we mentioned funding. I think it's really important, and this is a policy issue as well, that the policies are clear on how public and private funding can work together. But some opportunities: the European Investment Bank report on nature-based solutions saw that river restoration was medium readiness for investment and gives some really useful feedback on how to improve that readiness investment. There are opportunities around nature-based or sustainable certification that hydropower providers are looking at. There is the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy that is pushing private investors towards more green assets or investments. And also there is a growing development, this is all thanks to colleagues in Merlin from Ecologic and Connectology, about environment and social governance investments and crowdfunding. And there is a corporate social responsibility directive that's really pushing investment into more green infrastructure. So can we get dam removal more clearly on that agenda? So I finished there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kirsty, and success with your wider study and implementation of the policies on river restoration in the Merlin project. It's still running for 4 years, as far as I know, and yeah, we are a little bit proud that we participate with this contribution in it, but we are even more looking forward to the great results that we expect at the end of the project, of course. Thank you very much. Then we go to number 4. This Marcel Szabo Mesaros of the University of Technology and Economics in Hungary, and you represent the EU project Danube for All, Marcel. I think you are in the best position to tell us what the Danube for All project is and how it relates to the study we made. We came in contact more or less in the same way as with the Merlin project. When we were halfway our study, we were contacted through some people from the Danube for All project if our information would be of use for them, and out of this came also the cooperation between your project and our study. But your results and reflections about this cooperation, we are eager to hear this from you now. Please start your presentation.
Thank you, Bart. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So, thank you again. I'm Marcel Szabo Mesaros, representing the Danube for All project here today from the BME site. And this project is basically stands for Restoration of the Danube River Basin Waters for Ecosystem and People, from mountains to coast. And one of this work package is dealing with reconnecting rivers, floodplains, and delta. Today we heard that there are multiple dimensions of river connectivity, and it is not an easy task to find some kind of conceptualized methodology how to define all these connections and connectivities. And first, in my presentations, on my slides, I would like to refer to the eagering question: what is a free-flowing river? How to restore river connectivity? How to conserve the continuity of our rivers? Well, we also heard during our webinar earlier today that the biodiversity strategy aims to restore 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers on the continent by 2030. And how to reach that? Yeah, we have some intuitively, we have some thoughts, of course, barrier removal, fish passage creation, and so on, which would help to achieve this target. But do we have these possibilities everywhere? It is not an easy to answer. And in order to understand what shall we do and what shall we focus on, first we need to understand that what is the main target for us. How do we come to an agreement that when do we achieve this 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers? It is not an easy job. I just quote here the barrier removal for river restoration document, which is part of the biodiversity strategy as one of its milestone or fulfilling one of its action towards the targets in 2030. So long story short, there is no established consensus at what criteria would define a free-flowing river. We heard mainly about the longitudinal aspects, longitudinal connectivity, but there are three more. And first in the project, in the Danube for All, we wanted to go through the different policies on the EU level. How do they kind of implement and target the different kind of connectivities? And based on the findings from the many partners, we just started to work on this. But as you can see, there are many legislative actions from the EU level presented here, which deals with mainly and first and foremost on the longitudinal and lateral connectivity. The vertical connectivity, unfortunately, not addressed, not as we know about on the main as a main aspect, and the temporal connectivity or continuity restoration is so far mainly represented by dealt by the Water Framework Directive, not any other ones, unfortunately. When we go to the different aspects, whether it's flow dynamics, sediments, biota, nutrients, or other water quality or physical-chemical parameters are dealt with, this is also what we wanted to go through. But this is on the EU level. What happens at the national level? That is a more pragmatic question. We also have to go through and want to understand on a better level. And then came the report from Clara and Bert from STOWA, and it is actually a gap-filling report. So first and foremost, congratulations to both Clara and Bart, because it's a really difficult task to track on the national policies, even though it's, as we heard, it's focusing on longitudinal connectivity, but still it started a kind of work what is very relevant for most of the people, or for all of the people who are here, and most of the people in our field of and disciplines, because nobody likes to go through the legislative actions. And as we also saw from the survey earlier today, majority of the attendants are researchers, and researchers doesn't like to go through all these policies. So you made a very big help for the researcher communities and many other communities as well, and policymakers and stakeholders and so on. But for the researchers, it's a very great help, because this we can stick to and start to show it around that, look, this is what we are after. This is what we need from many different countries. The project is focusing on the Danube River Basin. Out of the 19 countries from the Danube Basin, we have 4 who has reported to your report. And we can use this as best practice, or best practice in that sense, that what kind of informations we would like to know about more from the national level, because it is important, as we saw from the presentations from Clara, that, for example, what is the prioritization strategy of the countries for river restoration? That is one. Or the different policies discussed through the classified aspects for different tools available on national level, the consultation types, the financing problems or possibilities, the implementation, local features or regional attributes. There are all these are important to understand that who shall we target when we come to disseminate the importance of connectivity and river restorations in general. Who shall we target in each of the countries? This is unique. And your report, I believe, and we do believe, I can say on behalf of the project, is such a great initiative and help. And it underlines the importance of transparent policy practices from country to country. And I just would like to emphasize that this is only a start of your work, but it's for the benefit for the whole continent and for the different countries and for the projects like Merlin and Danube for All as well. So I just encourage you, if you have the possibility to continue the work, extend it to many different countries as well, and to other dimensions of the connectivities as well, because we need to emphasize its importance. Thank you, Bart, and thank you, Clara.
Thank you very much, Marcel, for your reflections as well. You gave a very broad view on the different policies and directives, and we have also one question referring to that, but we will come back to later on how to bring this all together.
All right.
But it was very good that we asked the 4 of you to give your reflections, because I think in itself they answered some questions that might have been raised amongst the audience. And on the other hand, yeah, it makes even the sense of urgency of the matter even more important. Thank you very much. Then there is maybe time for some questions before we close off. Eduard, you are the timekeeper, so is this okay?
Yes, that's okay. Do you want me to take the lead on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a question from Lorena Lombana. She is a hydrologist, and she is asking, what are your thoughts on how to articulate the different European directives for the construction of natural river continuous restoration policies, knowing that it's a cross-cutting issue in the framework directives such as water floods, etc. I can give a very short answer. The EU find, and that's also according to what Marcel said about the matrix of a free-flowing river. It is not defined. This question is at the moment with EcoStat. You know, probably EcoStat, it's a group of 200 people who support the EU in elaborating directive in such a way that it can practically implement it. And they started a few months ago a study with an EcoStat group on this issue. and they expect to come up with something in draft before the end of the year for some consultation externally, and then early next year, hopefully, we get a better view on how all these things in a practical way bring together. This can also be helpful for continued studies on this issue, because when there is a kind of direction from the EU, you can also focus the study on it. On the other hand, having this study, that's also a good attribute for them to do the EcoStat work on what is a free-flowing river definition and what's related to that to get them implemented. There's another question from Karin Olsen. Sometimes the sediments are contaminated and the removal might give a temporary decrease in ecological stages, which are not allowed to happen. How do we deal with these obstacles like that? I don't know the question, answer to the question. I don't know if others know the question, but probably we need to bring this with us in the following studies, Karen. Did you really expect that we could give an answer to you, or do you make us aware about the problem that you are pointing out? I can't see you at the moment, but you probably are somewhere. But it is very difficult, but it is beyond the study, but it's one of the implications when you start on the river continuity. Were there other questions, Edouard?
No, I think that was it indeed in the chat.
Okay.
Any panelist would like to reply to these two questions?
Yeah.
In addition to the reply from Bart? Yes, Kirsty?
Sorry, I
go
invite
ahead.
Clara, you go ahead first. You were the main speaker.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I did not think of putting my virtual hand up. Yeah, just one thing, I saw another question in the chat, if it's possible to share our slides of presentation. I just wanted to point that out. And also, yeah, concerning the sediment, I mean, I'm not an expert in it, I'm still studying, but I've actually had the same discussion last week here in the Basque country where I'm located right now. And well, basically what they told me is that, of course, the first step is to, concerning the sediment contamination of sites where barriers might get removed. The first point is to yeah, measure the contamination, to see how it is contaminated. And then an option is to remove that contaminated sediment. Of course, this is not always easy because it might not be the first layer of sediment which is contaminated, and also it's quite costly. But yeah, that's my thought on that issue. Yeah, that's from my side. And yeah, please, Kirsty, go ahead.
Just briefly, I was going to say, as a social scientist, I would say this, that I think we should think about policy as a process. I think we should think about the international exchange and cooperation. So on the sediment, let's share knowledge between sites. How does people get around this? Everyone's affected by Water Framework Directive. So what do people do? I'm aware, I don't know the details, that in Merlin, some of our German partners and Dutch partners are sharing knowledge about how they get around Habitat Directive problems, where what they're trying to do is a temporary change in effect on protected species, and they're sharing knowledge. And in Germany, they found a workaround, so they're sharing it with the Dutch. So I think that's the first thing to say. But in terms of the articulation, in my experience, mainly based in the UK, it comes down to the professionals doing the implementation of policy on the ground. They do the interconnecting. They make these things work to be multi-objective and multifunctional. You can try and design it in the written documents, but it's actually the people delivering who can make it work. That's my experience.
Okay, thank you very much. Karen also answered in the chat box that sometimes the sediments are contaminated, and she thinks that it would be useful to discuss the issue. I think so too. If there is somebody amongst the audience who wants and can say something about it, that's still the opportunity for that. No one. There's a an answer in the chat box. It's okay for Karin. Well, are there any other questions, or are we about to close?
I think we can close, yeah.
Yeah. It's a little bit after 12, I think, so we should close anyway. Well, thank you very much, all of you. First of all, those who presented today, but also those who were amongst the audience today. For us, it was an important day, of course, because this was the first step to reach out to a wider audience with the study results. From now on, we will do this, first of all, through our contacts in our website, but we will also use workshops and conferences that may happen in the near future to present the results as well. Not for the results as such, but for the continued discussion, because that is one of the conclusions we drawn already at the very beginning when formulating the conclusions of the report, but is also drawn today, especially listening to the two presenters, but also the two other presenters from the countries and from the two projects. And this is an important input for future developments and to real ecosystem restoration. And that's why we're going to. It's not just river restoration, it is not just implementing measures, but in the UN decade of ecosystem restoration, we also should do work on freshwater ecosystem restoration. That's our job for the future, and the ECR wants to support anyone who is working on it, and especially the national governments, because that was the original idea of the ECR, to support the implementation, and who are first responsible for the implementation, the national governments and the related authorities. We wish them and all of us success with the steps, and that needs to be made from now on. I want to say that today we sent out a report and also a summary in our technical newsletter. And we discussed in between, Edouard and myself already, that we should also on the short term make available the presentations online. But we will also announce that, I think, in our ECR Next e-news. We included your addresses in our database, and when we send out a small report of this webinar, then we will also point out where you can find the presentations that have been given today, assuming, because it's recorded, that the presenters have no objections against it, but it's recorded anyway, and this will be made accessible for everyone as well. So I hand over the official closing to you, Erik. I think that you could add from your perspective as INBO and representing many river basin committees and managers, also a few wise words how we should go with this in the future.
Thank you very much, Bart. I'm not sure whether my words will be wise, but at least they will be short. I'd like to concentrate my closing remarks on three main points. The first one is a very basic one, but I think it's important to always insist on knowledge sharing, especially you've mentioned that already. This is one of the main purposes of this webinar, sharing good practices and experiences. We've seen also that it's very important at the local level to share information with the local stakeholders. It's very key aspects of their involvement. Barry database are key tools for our concerns of today. And I think this is really important to insist on all the processes and approaches that address this knowledge sharing necessity. Second remark, integration. Integration is a very important concept that, if you allow me jeu de mots, I think that if we want to improve river continuity policies, then we need really to work on policy continuities. within the water sector, of course, but also with other sectoral approaches such as energy or agriculture. But this is about integration, about coherence between different water policies. And of course, this echoes very much the ambition or the approach of integrated water resources management at the basin level. So horizontal integration, but also vertical integration from the EU policy level down to the very local stakeholder involvement issues and vice versa. So work in progress, as we've seen, and this is a very important issue. Third and last remark about implementation, about the necessity to accelerate restoration projects and really implementation of restoration tools. We think this is very important, and I would like to insist to one specific issue that probably we should address more deeply in the next webinar. What about the business case of river restoration? We've mentioned that, and that's the case for, more generally speaking, nature-based solutions. The cost benefits analysis, the effectiveness of the restoration projects, the necessity to communicate, to better communicate about the benefits of these restoration projects for the different stakeholders, for the local development issues. I think this is also very important if we want to accelerate implementation. With these three remarks, I would like to thank you again very much, to thank my colleagues from INBO for the preparation of this webinar, my colleagues from ECRR, of course, for the very useful inputs to this exchange of today. Thank you very much to our interpreters, and thank you, of course, to all of you, dear participants. And with that last remark, I would like to close this webinar and wish you a very fruitful day and week, and see you very soon in other conferences and webinars. Thank you. Bye-bye.